distinguished academic, a published author, legal practitioner, human rights activist, and the immediate past Director General of the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons. She's a professor of public law at the Nigerian Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, and she has a doctorate degree in law from the University of Pittsburgh, USA. Between 2019 and 2021, Professor Waziri Azi served as a senior special assistant to the former President Muhammadu Buhari on the rule of law in the office of the Vice President. Professor Waziri Azi's career has been dedicated to safeguarding the human rights of marginalized groups by implementing sustainable institutional reforms that enhance people-centered access to justice, harnessing the power of the law as a force for positive change. Please welcome, for the first time to the platform, Professor Waziri Azi as she takes the stage. A warm round of applause, please.
Please be seated. Good morning, the Convener Nation. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed an honor to share the stage with so many other distinguished speakers who have come before. For years, I have watched the platform on television, so I thank Pastor Poju and Toyin Oyemade for inviting me. It is truly a pleasure to be here. Although I have only 30 minutes to speak, I decided to merge two issues and address a topic that strikes at the very heart of our national development, which is the dangerous role of corruption in driving human trafficking, its profound implications, and the solution that can lead to a brighter tomorrow. So as we gather here today on Independence Day to deliberate on the future of our great nation, it is also imperative to recognize and confront the twin evils of human trafficking and corruption, both of which undermines our collective aspiration for progress, stability, and prosperity. The two previous speakers, Mr. Adesina and Dr. Sanni, in passing talked about the Japa syndrome. And I noticed that a lot of times when Japa comes up, people laugh, but it's serious business. In my role as Director General of NAPTIP, I saw a lot of young people get into trouble just because of this thing called Japa. Now, human trafficking, as we know, is a crime that preys on the most vulnerable members of our society. It is an appalling violation of human rights that destroys lives and erodes the social fabric of our community. Corruption, on the other hand, is the insidious force that perpetrates this crime, enabling traffickers to operate with impunity, weakening our institutions and stalling our development. So in the next 25 minutes or so, I'll explore the critical nexus between human trafficking and corruption, examine its far-reaching impacts on national development, proffer solutions that can break this deadly circle, and I will end with the role you all can play that can help unlock the potential to effectively deal with these issues. Next slide, please. So to comprehend the complex relationship between human trafficking and corruption, it is essential to understand what these terms mean so we can recognize their manifestation. So human trafficking is not just statistics. It is the faces, the stories, the hopes of those who suffer. And we must recognize its intricacies, how it thrives in the shadows, exploiting desperation and fear. And we must recognize that behind every case, there is a human face. Now, a lot of people, understand human trafficking as the movement of persons from one place to another, whether within or outside the borders of a country of origin for the purpose of exploitation. However, it is more complex than that because human trafficking involves the recruitment, the transportation, the transfer, the harboring, and the receipts of persons. It could be through the means of whether fraud, force, coercion, deception, abuse of power, or vulnerability, or giving and receiving of benefits for the sole purpose of exploitation. Now, let me break this down further. For an act to qualify as human trafficking, it must have 3 key elements. So we have the act, what is done, which is whether it's the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt. Then we have the means, what is done. So through, or rather how it's done. So it could be through fraud, through deceit, through coercion, through abuse of power. Then we have the purpose, why it's done, which, like I said, solely for exploitation. So to further distinguish, and this goes to the very young people here in the house and those probably watching on TV or online, when you pay someone, you enter into a transaction with a smuggler to take you into a country where you are neither the citizen or a legal resident. You are not a victim of human trafficking. You are a smuggled migrant, and that in itself is a crime. When you enter another country outside the migratory framework of that country, probably you use false documentation or you overstay on your visa, you are not a victim of human trafficking. You are an irregular migrant, which is also a crime. So it is clear that human trafficking is an entire value chain with different people playing different roles in the exploitation process, thereby creating that opportunity for corruption, which I'll speak on in a little bit. Next slide, please. So human trafficking is one of the most profitable criminal enterprises in the world, generating a yearly revenue of around $150 billion. Let me put this in perspective by doing a very vivid back-of-the-envelope calculation. So imagine one trafficker controls 50 girls. Each of these girls are forced to have sexual relationship with, say, 15 men a day at perhaps $50 per man. So which means one victim generates an income of $750 a day. Now multiply that by 50 girls. It gives you $37,500 a day. So let's assume these girls are forced to work for, say, 20 days in a month. Multiply that, it gives you $750,000 US dollars a month. Crazy, right? Now, Nigeria, unfortunately, has become a significant source, transit, and destination country for trafficked persons, particularly women and children, who are subjected to the traditional form of trafficking as we know them. Next slide, please. So whether it's sexual exploitation, forced labor, debt bondage, domestic servitude, buying and selling of persons, child pornography, or organ harvesting. However, human trafficking has continued to evolve in line with globalization and in terms of demand and supply, especially with digital transformation, which has led to a massive online explosion. So what that means is that traffickers now operate online as much as they do offline, meaning traffickers now have access to a wider pool of persons. So human trafficking, as it is traditionally understood, has progressed, and current trends of human trafficking include fake online job and scholarship advertorials. We have human trafficking fueled cyber fraud, and this is where traffickers lure victims and through deceit, of course, and force them to work as online scammers. We have trafficking through sports. We have orphanage trafficking, the use of flyers to recruit victims, then peer-to-peer recruitment for organ harvesting. And organ harvesting, I believe, is a crime that everyone should be aware of, so that you can, in turn, educate others about it, because there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation about organ donation and organ transplantation. In fact, this past March, NAPTIP, which is National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons, commenced the prosecution of the first ever organ harvesting case involving a very popular Abuja-based hospital. The case is still being prosecuted, but there's a lot of information regarding this case online that you can read about. And finally, we have what is referred to as sextortion. So let's talk about the crime of sextortion for a little bit. Sextortion is a crime that occurs when someone threatens to distribute the nudes or private videos of another person, except that person either, grants them some sexual favors or pays them money. And sextortion is a global problem affecting mostly children and teenagers, and has led to a high rate of suicide amongst children. In Nigeria, sextortion affects mostly young adults, especially university students. In 2023, which was just last year, the US National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received 26,400 reports of financial sextortion, including 6,100 financial sextortion from Nigeria, which amounts to 23% of the global sextortion reports that were received in 2023. And this is extremely disturbing. In fact, this past August, Meta, so the owners of Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Threads, removed about 63,000 Instagram accounts in Nigeria attempting to target people with financial sextortion scams, including a coordinated network of around 2,500 accounts. It also removed 1,300 Facebook accounts, 200 Facebook pages, and 5,700 Facebook groups, also based in Nigeria, that are providing tips. So you see, sextortion is now a big business in Nigeria that provide tips to people interested in the sextortion scam business. So please think about that when next you become extremely friendly and trusting, with that person you just met, that good friend you just met online, to the extent of wanting to share your private content with them. Please don't. Now, corruption, on the other hand, next slide, please, is the abuse of power for private gain, and it takes many forms, ranging from the minor use of influence to institutionalized bribery, including behaviors or practices such as bribery, nepotism, collusion, fraud, embezzlement, self-dealing, trading in influence, and misappropriation of public resources. So corruption erodes public trust, it weakens institutions, and undermines the rule of law. Now, in the context of human trafficking, next slide, corruption provides the enabling environment that allows the crime to be invisible, enables the impunity of offenders, and ensures the re-victimization of victims of human trafficking. Corruption facilitates trafficking and aids the flow of people by weakening counter-human trafficking measures. For the business of human trafficking to thrive, it feeds off a broken system and relies on exploiting legal loopholes, collusion with law enforcement, judicial complications, and trafficker impunity. Now, since corruption is central to the success of traffickers, it becomes a necessary investment for criminals. And this could be in form of accepting or transferring bribes, facilitating transactions, obstruction of justice, complicity, or ignoring the fact to act when a crime is taking place. So corruption at different stages of trafficking involves a chain of corrupt actors. It is present from the initial planning to where a victim is trafficked and exploitation begins. Next slide, please. We have so go back. You're on the right slide. So we have the recruitment stage, which is the first step in trafficking. And traffickers use various methods and antics to recruit their victims, which could be, like I said, online or offline. And it is at this stage that the person becomes a victim. corruption here is likely to take the form of complicity from duty bearers whose responsibility it is to ensure acts like this do not take place. We have the next stage, which is the transport and transfer stage, which may also involve the internal or external movement of persons. For internal trafficking, the mode of transportation is mostly by road, and for external trafficking, the mode of transportation can be by road, by sea, and by air. Commercial luxury buses, boats, and ferry owners can be complicit in the process by allowing the use of their transportation mode to feed the trafficking of people for bribes and other illegal payments. Now, with trans-border trafficking of persons, it is during border crossings that corruption often is the most likely and profitable. And these transit routes provide the entry point for the involvement of additional actors, such as immigration officers at both sides of the border and other non-state actors taking bribes from traffickers or even partnering directly with traffickers. Then we have the third stage, which is the exploitation. And this is the final stage of trafficking and occurs when victims reach the destination, allowing exploitation to take place. And in the case of sexual exploitation, traffickers usually rely on networks of hotel and brothel owners to supply victims for a fee or use their premises to exploit them, receiving a percentage of money generated by the victims, who are mostly women and girls. In my role as Director General NAPTIP, we only handled one case of a 26-year-old man who was trafficked to Bahrain for sexual exploitation. Of course, it was the same story. He was told there was a job waiting for him in Bahrain in an oil company. On getting there, he found himself in a brothel. And when he tried explaining to the woman that, no, this was not what I was told by, the agent and all that, the woman was like, young man, I don't know what you're talking about. I paid for you, so you have to work here. And this young man was forced to work in a brothel for 6 months, and he was made to have sexual relationship with 20 women a day. So he wakes up in the morning, and they inject him, they pump him up with drugs so that he can have the ability to have sexual relationship with that many women. So he was able to escape. Somebody helped him. He was able to escape after 6 months, came back to Nigeria and reported the case to NAPTIP. And with the information and intel he shared with us, we were able to arrest 2 different trafficking rings, one in Anambra and one in Lagos. For labor exploitation, the conditions are equally brutal. Victims are literally dealt with as slaves. So let's look at the impact of corruption on counter-trafficking efforts, which is multifaceted and insidious, hindering progress at every turn with far-reaching implications for our country. Nation building, as we know, requires strong, transparent institutions, the rule of law, and a commitment to justice and human dignity. And corruption erodes these foundations by, first, undermining victim identification and protection, whereby corrupt officials accept bribes from traffickers to turn a blind eye to their activities, making it easier for traffickers to operate without detection, sharing information about potential investigations, or tipping traffickers off about raids. It also fosters corruption within victim protection services, such as shelters and homes, which can compromise the safety and security of victims. For example, corrupt staff may exploit victims for financial gain, intimidate them, thereby creating a climate of fear and distrust, discouraging victims from coming forward and making it harder for law enforcement to identify and protect them. It hinders prosecution of traffickers, where offenders bribe law enforcement officials to overlook their criminal activities, and this can result in cases being dropped, charges being reduced, or lenient sentences being imposed, thereby failing to hold traffickers accountable. And also, corruption may lead to the misallocation or diversion of funds intended for anti-trafficking programs and initiatives. It also leads to the lack of support for victims because of corrupt practices through the misallocation or diversion of funds, resources, and services intended for victim support programs, which reduces the availability of protective services for trafficking victims. And there are instances where victims are even forced to pay bribes or provide sexual favors for assistance or protection, thereby undermining their rights, their dignity, and their well-being. Now, what are the solutions for addressing corruption in the context of human trafficking? And I have come up with some key solutions. We need to strengthen our legal framework. Domestic laws on trafficking in persons should be in line with international standards concerning trafficking in persons and corruption. As such, the Nigerian Trafficking in Persons Act should be amended to include corruption-related human trafficking issues by criminalizing acts by public officials who use their office or position to impede investigation, prosecution, or the execution of a lawful order. We have transparency and integrity framework for public officials at risk, which should be established and strengthened. So institutions all across Nigeria, mostly federal institutions, have what is called the Anti-Corruption Transparency Unit. We have it in sectors like NAPTIP, in Nigerian Police Force, and Nigerian Immigration Services. And these sectors I just mentioned are at-risk sectors when it has to do with human trafficking. So the actors in these sectors should be empowered to investigate and report corruption-related human trafficking cases. Number 3, human trafficking is increasingly recognized as a predicate offense for money laundering, meaning the proceeds derived from this illicit activity are often laundered to disguise their illegal origin through cash incentive businesses. As such, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, and NAPTIP must continue to jointly address and investigate human trafficking and corruption issues with particular focus on at-risk sectors like travel agencies, tour operators, and labor recruitment agencies. And the reason why these 3 sectors I just mentioned are at-risk sectors is because historically these are sectors that have been abused and they are used to traffic young Nigerian men and women abroad under the guise of a better life. Number 4, the National Action Plan on Human Trafficking and the National Anti-Corruption Strategy should be inclusive of strategies that address trafficking in persons and vice versa, because an integrated action plan ensures a holistic approach to tackling human trafficking and related corruption. And by addressing both issues simultaneously, efforts are more coordinated and effective. Then corruption issues should be investigated side by side the investigation of human trafficking. Corruption involving public officials may be referred to the Independent Corrupt Practices Commission for investigation and prosecution. Also, there should be in place a strong whistleblower and witness protection mechanism that allows victims and the public expose and report cases of corruption. Protection mechanisms give whistleblowers and witnesses the confidence to report incidents of corruption without fear or retaliation or harm. Then we have the recruitment process of officers who work at risk sectors must be stringent and transparent, and that includes officers who work in whether it's the anti-corruption or anti-trafficking institutions, also prosecutors, investigators, and judicial officers. And upon recruitment, they should be subjected to regular performance evaluation and, of course, sporadic polygraph tests. We know that polygraph tests are not admissible in court. They are just integrity tests. But then with a polygraph result, it gives clarity. So you understand those who are compromised or those who have the ability to be compromised. And this brings me to a call to action. So human trafficking happens in plain sight. It is far more prevalent, complex, and close to home than most of us realize, and we all need to pay attention because we need to make the decision that tells us who we are as a people and as a nation, because we are all implicated in this problem. I remember Mr. Adesina talked about government not being able to do everything. Of course, to have a holistic solution for anything, there has to be a whole of government and whole of society approach. And when we talk about issues of human trafficking, it is a crime that happens mostly at the community level. It is a crime that happens in homes. We've seen cases where parents traffic their own children, sisters traffic their own sisters, nephews, nieces are trafficked by uncles or aunts, whether it is directly or indirectly. So in as much as government, they have their own role at the macro level, the work has to be done by you and I. So we can keep strengthening our legal frameworks and law enforcement capacities, promote transparency, accountability, and integrity amongst public officers, and enhance investigation of corruption-related human trafficking issues. But ladies and gentlemen, this change cannot happen on its own. And I implore each one of you to please take minimalist actions, support governmental and non-governmental organizations working tirelessly to combat human trafficking issues in Nigeria. We have government institutions, we have NAPTIP, we have the police, we have immigration, the Nigerian Immigration Service. For the non-governmental sectors, there are a number of NGOs that work in these areas. So they need our support. Educate yourself. Knowledge is power. Learn about the science of human trafficking, the tactics traffickers use, and the resources available to victims. The more you know, the better equipped you are to recognize and report suspicious activities. Spread awareness by using your voice. Share information about human trafficking with your friends, your family, and community. Social media is a powerful tool. You don't just use social media to badmouth your country, like Mr. Adesina pointed out. You can also use social media to spread awareness about issues of human trafficking. Amplify the voices of survivors and spread the message that trafficking will not be tolerated. A lot of times I see young people, posting on social media saying, oh, please, I want to go to Europe. Anybody that can help me get to Europe, I'm happy to connect with that person. And like I said, human traffickers have moved from offline to online. And the reason why they are online is because they can have a wider pool of victims. A lot of the victims that I interacted with in my role as DJ NAPTIP, they met their traffickers online. So traffickers just go online, they post. Sometimes they actively hunt. Sometimes they just catfish. So we have to be careful about what we put online or the categories of people we interact with. Support victims. Many organizations are working tirelessly to rescue and rehabilitate victims of human trafficking. Consider donating your time, your money, or resources to these groups. Even small contributions can make a big difference in a victim's life. Do not judge them by their circumstances. Instead, offer empathy and understanding. I know a lot of people have this notion, when you talk about human trafficking, they say, oh, it's about prostitution. No, human trafficking is not about prostitution. Human trafficking is a crime. It is a crime against individuals. It is a crime against communities. It is a crime against the country, and it is a crime against families. And even though I said in my role as NAPTIP, I only came across one case of a man that was trafficked for sexual exploitation. A lot of people who are trafficked for labor exploitations are men. And whether it's sexual exploitation or labor exploitation, the how will I even say, the situation is really, really brutal. When you are forced to work for 20 or 21 hours a day, you don't call that a job anymore. That is slavery in itself. Then also be vigilant. Pay attention to your surroundings and trust your instincts. If something doesn't seem right, report it. Your alertness could save a life. Advocate for change. Support businesses that are committed to ethical practices and hold those that aren't accountable, especially those who use underage children for exploitative work. We have a crisis in Nigeria when it has to do with the use of underage children for domestic work. People use kids to take care of kids. People use 10-year-olds, 9-year-olds in their homes to do all sorts of exploitative work. Then start at home. Human trafficking can begin with the exploitation of vulnerable individuals in the privacy of homes who are trapped in a circle of domestic servitude or debt bondage. So debt bondage usually involves when somebody facilitates your travel, whether within Nigeria or outside Nigeria for labor purposes. Then when you get there, they tell you, oh, you have to work for a year. That person, that broker, whether it's a broker or an agent, we collect your salary for a year or 2 years before the victim even starts earning salary for themselves. And that happens a lot with house helps, people who patronize agents. So if somebody brings you a help and insists that you pay that money to them, know at the back of your mind that you are also facilitating human trafficking. That is what is called debt bondage. Then become a mentor or support programs that provide mentorship to at-risk youths. Positive role models can make a significant difference. There is no greater legacy than to help someone else win. Don't just look for miracles. Become someone else's miracle. And stay committed. The fight against human trafficking is a long one. It requires persistence and dedication. Don't let the enormity of the problem discourage you. Every action counts. Every voice matters. And remember that small power can be meaningful power. Your small actions become an instrument for your own visibility, your own steadiness and sense of connection. It is how we grow, because individual actions, when combined, can have a profound impact on combating human trafficking and helping survivors rebuild their lives. So in closing, let me be clear. Combating human trafficking in Nigeria is not a choice. It is a moral imperative. The role corruption plays in enabling human trafficking represents a formidable challenge to Nigeria's nation-building efforts. However, it is a challenge that we can and must overcome. And may our collective efforts pave the way for a better and safer Nigeria. Thank you and happy independence.